Listen closely. We don't have much time. The situation is dawai. Every second counts, so pay attention and follow my instructions precisely.
I'm 78 years old and most days are quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where memories have room to speak whether you invite them or not. And there's one thing that keeps coming back to me, especially in the evenings when the house settles and I realize there aren't many people left who might call. I learned too late that my silence cost me the people I loved most. I don't mean I was cruel. I wasn't absent in the way people usually imagine. I went to work. I paid bills. I showed up physically. But I didn't speak when it mattered. I didn't say what I felt. I didn't ask the questions that scared me. I didn't explain myself when misunderstanding crept in. I thought keeping quiet was safer, kinder even. At this age, you start to feel time differently. It's not dramatic. It's not like a clock ticking loudly. It's more like realizing the room is smaller than you thought. You don't have the same sense that you can walk around things forever. Some doors are just closed now. Not telling this because I need forgiveness. Most of the people I'd want to say this to aren't here anymore. I'm saying it because if I don't say it now, it'll stay trapped where it's been living for decades, and I don't want it to die with me unspoken again. When I was younger, in my 20s and 30s, silence felt responsible. I grew up in a house where feelings weren't discussed. You did your part. You didn't complain. You didn't stir things up. Something hurt, you swallowed it and kept going. That wasn't unusual where I came from. Men especially weren't taught to explain themselves. You were taught to endure, to provide, to stay steady. Words were for emergencies, so when I fell in love, I loved the way I knew how. I stayed, I worked hard. I assumed the other person could see what I felt by what I did. I thought saying things out loud was unnecessary, maybe even selfish. My wife used to ask me what I was thinking. I'd say, nothing. And that was usually true, at least on the surface. I wasn't hiding secrets. I just didn't know how to translate what lived inside me into words, or I didn't think it mattered enough to try. She'd tell me she felt alone sometimes. I'd hear it as criticism, not as an invitation, so I'd go quiet. I'd retreat into routines, long hours at work, fixing things around the house, watching the news instead of talking. I told myself this was adulthood. This was what commitment looked like. You didn't need to talk about everything. You just needed to keep things running. Years pass very easily that way. You miss a birthday dinner because work ran late. You skip a conversation because you're tired. You assume there will be another chance, a better moment, a calmer time to say what you mean. There's always tomorrow until there is. I remember specific moments now, ones that seemed small at the time. Standing in the kitchen while my wife washed dishes, her back turned to me, waiting for me to say something. I didn't know what exactly, so I said nothing. My son once asked me if I was proud of him. He was maybe 16. I laughed it off and told him he was doing fine. I didn't say the words he was actually asking for. I assumed he knew. I assumed wrong. Silence has a way of filling itself with other meanings. People don't hear nothing. They hear rejection or disinterest or judgment. They hear that they don't matter enough to be met halfway. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. I thought I was being neutral, staying out of the way, letting things settle on their own. That's one of the great lies I lived with, that things settle on their own. What they do is drift, slowly, quietly, without announcement. By my 40s, there was a distance in my marriage that didn't have a clear beginning. No single fight you could point to, no betrayal, just space. Long pauses where conversation used to be. Decisions made separately instead of together. We still lived in the same house. We still shared meals. From the outside, we probably looked fine. Inside, we were strangers who knew each other's habits. I didn't ask her how lonely she was. I didn't ask because I was afraid of the answer. And because I didn't ask, I told myself everything was manageable. When she finally told me she was tired, I treated it like exhaustion, like something a vacation or less stress would fix. I didn't hear it as a warning, I heard it as a phase. She stopped trying to talk to me long before she stopped loving me. That's something I understand now. Back then, I thought the quiet meant peace. The children grew up, they moved out, we adjusted, or so I thought. I missed entire parts of their lives while sitting in the same room. I knew what schools they attended, but not what kept them awake at night. I knew their achievements, but not their fears. When they stopped coming to me with problems, I told myself they were independent. I felt proud of that. I didn't realize it was also resignation. The damage was never loud. That's the hardest part to explain. Nothing exploded. No one stormed out dramatically. It was erosion, grain by grain. And erosion doesn't feel like loss while it's happening. It feels like stability. The turning point didn't come with a speech or a revelation. It came with a phone call. My wife got sick. Not suddenly, but seriously. The kind of illness that rearranges your priorities whether you're ready or not. I used to think the quiet would get easier with age. That if you lived long enough, you'd get used to it. In some ways, you do. You stop expecting noise. You stop being surprised when days pass without interruption. But easier isn't the right word. You just learn how to live inside it. There are moments when the silence feels earned. like rest after a long life. And there are moments when it feels like a verdict. People ask me sometimes what I miss most. They expect me to say youth or health or energy. I miss conversations that never happened. I miss the sound of my own voice saying things that mattered before it learned how to stay quiet so well. I replay ordinary days more than big moments. The mornings when everyone rushed out the door and I stayed seated thinking I'd talk later. The evenings when the house was full but everyone was in their own corner. I was there. That's what I tell myself. I was there. But being there isn't the same as being known. I didn't grow up with examples of men who talked about feelings. The men I knew worked, drank their coffee, fixed what was broken, and kept their thoughts private. Silence was how they showed control. I copied that without questioning it. I thought that was maturity. No one told me that silence can look like indifference to the people closest to you. When my children were young, I thought my job was to prepare them for the world by not coddling them. I didn't want to weaken them with too much reassurance. I thought restraint was a gift. I thought they'd thank me later. They didn't ask for perfection, they asked for warmth. And I rationed it like it was something I might run out of. I see now that I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of opening something I didn't know how to close, afraid that if I spoke honestly, I'd expose how unsure I often felt. Silence felt safer than clumsy truth. There's a strange thing that happens when you don't practice saying what you feel. Eventually, you lose the ability to find the words at all. They don't line up anymore, they scatter, and then it feels easier to say nothing than to risk sounding foolish. By the time I realized this, the habits were set. My family was used to me being quiet. They stopped waiting for me to speak. That's another thing I didn't understand soon enough. People don't keep asking forever. They try for a while, then they protect themselves. I don't blame them. After my wife died, I went through her things slowly. Drawers, closets, papers I'd never looked at closely. I found notes she'd written to herself, nothing dramatic, lists, reminders, thoughts she never shared. In one notebook, there was a sentence that stopped me. It said, "I don't think he knows how much I need to hear it." I sat on the bed for a long time with that notebook in my hands. There was no anger in her writing, just tiredness, a kind of quiet sadness that matched my own. That's when it fully landed, not as guilt, but as understanding. She wasn't asking for grand gestures. She was asking for acknowledgement, for evidence that she mattered beyond logistics and responsibilities. I gave her a life that worked. I didn't always give her a life that felt alive. The same pattern followed me into friendships. I kept people at a polite distance. I listened more than I spoke. I avoided difficult conversations. Over time, the friendships thinned out. No arguments, just fewer calls. Now, when I look back, it's hard to tell where my personality ends and my fear begins. I told myself I was just a quiet person. Maybe I am, but quiet doesn't have to mean closed. There are days now when I wish someone would ask me what I think. Not because I have something important to say, but because being asked reminds you that you still exist in someone else's mind. Aging teaches you humility whether you want it or not. You need help. You forget things. You repeat stories. You become slower, less relevant in the way the world measures relevance. If you don't have strong connections by then, it shows. I don't say that with bitterness, just honesty. Old age magnifies what was already there. If you built closeness, it deepens. If you relied on distance, it becomes very clear. I still talk to my children. We're polite. We share updates. Holidays are cordial. There's love there, but it's careful, like everyone is aware of old gaps and doesn't quite know how to step into them now. Sometimes I want to sit them down and explain myself. Tell them I wasn't cold, I was scared, that I loved them more than I ever managed to say. But explanations don't change history, and they might sound like excuses, so instead I try to be present now. I listen carefully. I say I love you at the end of calls, even if it feels a little awkward, even if it comes out stiff. I say it anyway. It doesn't fix the past, but it matters to me that it's said. People like to believe there's a moment when everything clicks and you suddenly become wise. It's not like that. Understanding comes in pieces, often after the usefulness has passed. That's one of the quieter tragedies of a long life. You finally know what you needed to know when you can no longer fully use it. Still, knowing has its own weight and its own responsibility. If you're listening and you recognize yourself in this, I'm not asking you to become someone else overnight. I'm not asking you to be more expressive or emotional than you are. Just notice where silence is coming from. Is it calm or is it avoidance? Is it peace or is it fear? There's a difference, and you can usually feel it in your body before you can explain it in words. Say the simple things, not perfectly, not poetically, just plainly, before the moment passes and takes the opportunity with it. Because one day you may be sitting where I am, in a quiet room with plenty of time to think. And not enough places left to send the truth. I've accepted that my life won't be remembered loudly. That's all right. Most lives are. What I still struggle with is knowing how much warmth I carried and how little of it I let escape. The remaining time I have is smaller now. I feel that. I move slower. I rest more. I think more than I speak. But when I do speak, I try to mean it. This story isn't a warning. It's just a record of what happens when love stays internal too long. Tonight, like most nights, will end quietly. I'll turn off the lights. I'll sit with my thoughts until sleep comes. And I'll hope that somewhere someone hears this and decides not to wait.